Hello and welcome to another edition of our reinvention workshop. I'm so glad to be here. I have with me the delightful and excellent co-founder, Dr. Eileen. She's here with me today, and we're going to be talking about integrity. Actually, this is a discussion we started last week, and we're going to be continuing this week. How are you doing, Eileen? You're looking great.
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Thank you for being here again to enlighten us and the audience. Yes, it's great to be here. We have this on Sunday. It's actually my time around 9 a.m. And in a way, when I attend sessions like this, it's like going to church. And for those people who are churchgoer, I'm not saying that you shouldn't go to church. I'm just saying that this should be part of your spiritual practices. Like now, after I attend the session, I'll go to church, right? So I hope that you will integrate this as part of your spiritual practice.
All right. Yeah. So what's this new thing about going to church? Because I know you're not a church goer. So what's this newfound inspiration that you have with going to church?
Actually, I am a church goer. However, the kind of church I don't really define. I don't really offend anybody because some people are very serious about going to church. But I find God everywhere.
Okay.
And of course, we all have maybe a little bit of personal definition about God, but I find God everywhere. So I don't feel like I need to go to church to do that. But usually when I say I do go to church, I meant when I just moved from Hawaii to California. So when I was in Hawaii, I would go to a farmers market every Sunday. And to me, because I see so much abundance everywhere and people happy, people just delighted by fresh vegetable or something like that.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful place and people have handicraft and, everybody's smiling. And sometimes we have music. I just felt like that's like the church for me. So, but then now that I come to the Bay Area, so and also because of my work in Africa, so I feel like I needed to be and the African diaspora community. So I feel like I need to be a little closer, to what I do. So yes, I have decided that I'm going to start going to church where there's a more conducive environment for doing what I want to do. A Black church, yes.
Right. It's actually very interesting because when you talk about even the notion of a church and religion and spirituality, it's all about where you find meaning, where you derive meaning from. And it's an environment that actually provides meaning, a source of meaning for people. To a large extent, it's a spiritual environment. It's a spiritual ecosystem. So it's all about finding where you derive meaning from and being able to articulate actually what I think that is the more difficult thing, because a lot of people who are church goers, they go to church, but they do that out of ritual. Get a point. They do that.
It's the action is it's almost like it's like brushing teeth. I don't want to, of course not. It can be a good thing and a bad thing because habit is important, right? But I think that at some point in our life, we need to think about why we do what we do.
Exactly.
To have an intention, like you said. You mentioned that before. And Ugo, I was when I was preparing for this session, I was thinking about the question that I supposed to ask today. And I thought about something, right? So it's very much tied into what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
And this is really a good place to start because we're talking about spirituality. Now, the topic today is really a succession or a continuation of what we talked about last week, which is on integrity, right? So, but last week we focused really on like how does integrity affect decision making? How does decision making affect success, in your life? Today, I was thinking about something just popped up in my mind. I really want to talk about like self-leadership. Integrity, self-leadership, and when you talk about it is a spiritual, it's very spiritual. This, you know, this topic is actually very spiritual. And so when you talk about a spiritual ecosystem, it is, I think it's on point. So would you mind to explore on that a little bit more? Like self-leadership, like leadership is really important for Africa, right? For example, or for any, you know, nation building process, right? So exactly. Yeah, so I want to use this because I think we're always on we're nation builders at each one of us in the world, right? So we're always on, you know, in the process of nation building, because the community is always transforming. We ourselves are always transforming. So how does that all kind of tie in together about this integrity, you know, this word, and self-leadership? So thank you.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very interesting question. And I love the way you tied it up with even what we started off with about ecosystem of meaning. And I'm going to tie that into the very question, that you raised here, an ecosystem of meaning. Because if we talk about self-leadership, we are talking about being able to lead a life of vision, being able to lead a life of integrity, being able to lead a life of focus, and more importantly, a life that others will look after you and follow. You get the points? And,
no. Can you repeat that one more time, please?
A life that others will look up to you after you're gone. So a life of legacy.
So it's like a legacy.
Yeah. So when we talk about what you talked about, self-leadership, I think the reason it's very important is because for you to have self-leadership, for you to bring in leadership into your life, you need to bring in intentionality. And the very place intentionality begins with actually comes from its meaning. You have to be able to understand where you derive your source of meaning. And that's why when we talk about the ecosystem of meaning and you talk about nation building, what a nation is in particular, in reality, what a nation is essentially that's this ecosystem of meaning that we're talking about. And what do I mean by an ecosystem of meaning? An ecosystem of meaning is a place where people come together to bring shared belief, shared hope, shared faith in a vision of a future, of a reality that they want for themselves. And it's also that shared faith and belief in something that they believe, in something that they hold there, actually comes from a memory that they have created from their past experiences, what they have been able to, some kind of a communal surgeon that they have gone together in order to come to where they are. So practical example is the United States.
Okay, sorry, what did you say? Communal surgeon?
Yes, like a communal surgeon. So a practical example would be the United States. So you see the founding fathers that's came together to draw up the article that's they used in forming the United States, actually had a history where they are coming from. They had a memory of where they are coming from, where their rights were not recognized, where they suffered, where the majority of the things that they hold there as human beings actually were
oh my God! You just talked about something very, very important. So you're basically kind of mentioning about Black history in the U.S., right? Like how their rights were not recognized, and then how that actually, how do I say that, bring to where we are right now, where we are, and the whole environment, how that was shaped. Okay.
Exactly. So the same thing that happened to the Blacks also equally happened to the whites, the people that came from Portugal or Europe and came together to form the United States. So they also had issues that all of them identify on a very deep level as individuals, and those things were things that we are taking away from them. So they were able to come together to create meaning around their needs, around the things that they hold together, and within that ecosystem. So that's what I call an ecosystem of meaning. So they come together and then they were able to draw up that these are the things that we hold there. the human being should the rights of human beings should be upheld, that we are all created equal, and that we believe in all of this. We hold these truths to be true, that all men are created equal and all of that. So that comes together to form that ecosystem of meaning. And it's around that ecosystem of meaning that people now build around political movements. It's where people build around religion. Well, it's where people build around tradition. That's where you form around culture. So all of these things, culture, religion, politics, all of these factors are architectures, what I call architectures of meaning. They are architectures that are built to hold the ecosystem of meaning that the people have created. And it's from this architecture, when you have these strong architectures or structures, if you would like to call it that way, that holds this ecosystem of meaning together, then you can have a nation. Because a nation is a people that hold together, they have the same vision, they have the same culture, they have the same belief system, and they have the same vision of where they're going together. But all of these things cannot come if there is no vision that the people are looking up to. And if they don't have a common memory, something from which they are borrowing in order to create the future of where they're going. So it's important that you have this. And things like this, when we talk about ecosystem of meaning and the building nationhood, these are not things that just pop up, out of the blue. They are actually chaired by individuals who recognize, who are actually dogged in their quest to create something, in their quest to leave a legacy, in their quest, to create a better future for the people coming after them. So these are individuals who are able to apply this leadership, this self-leadership that you talked about. And
wait, hold on a second. The self-leadership that I was mentioned earlier, to me is more about, okay, so yes, these founding fathers, they including the African American, the African community when they were first here, they were part of the building blocks. But before that can even happen, right? To me, self-leadership means that before you can build anything, you got to build yourself first.
Of course, definitely.
Right. So when you're talking about self-leadership, are you talking about the self-leadership of the community, the founding members of, say, the United States, or are you talking about the self-leadership of individuals? I wanted to kind of.
I'm talking about the self-leadership of the individuals, because communities and countries and nations are built up by individuals. There is no such thing as a nation, so to speak. There are only a group of people who come together with a shared vision and purpose, in order to create that nation. And that's why a nation or a country that is deprived of education, of people, of educated populace, cannot build a nation. They can't build a common purpose going together. So what education does is to give self-leadership, to a certain level of self-leadership to individuals, to empower individuals to be able to articulate their lives and lead a better life. So what I'm talking about here is that these individuals who came together in order to form this nationhood or this ecosystem of meaning, if they hadn't built up themselves, if they hadn't self-leadership, if they hadn't integrity, they wouldn't have been able to envision that kind of a community that they built. So that's why it's important that wherever you are, you want to ensure that you begin with leading yourself. It's the wisest advice in the book, the oldest advice in the book, man, know thyself. Because for you to know yourself, for you to lead yourself, you have to know yourself. So it's a very important point that I think going forward, that's doing anything, becoming successful at anything that you're doing, you really have to understand yourself. And it begins with I think for a lot of people, when we talk about understanding the self, it can be quite complex or hazy idea, some kind of a fuzzy idea for them, because you say, how do I understand myself? I think my name is Ugo. and I'm a Nigerian, or I'm African, and therefore that's who I am. But in essence, if you go down and try drilling down on the question of who am I, what am I, then you begin to understand that beyond your race, beyond your or ethnic identity, beyond the color of your skin, there are fundamental elements and things that come together to make up who you are and what you are, that you need to understand and that you need to take hold of in order for you to go forward. And of course, if you have
but I'm gonna just stop that for a second. So we talk about the self-leadership of the leaders that formed our nations, right? But we both know that there are a lot of leaders are struggling in their personal life.
Of course.
And so I just wanted to kind of explore that as well. You know, when we talk about self-leadership, we're not talking about a perfect examples of a perfect human being. And I think we are all kind of like trying to balance, you know, trying to be balanced, like between work and school and relationship, you know, and home, you know, and so on and so forth. So I just want to let the audience know that that is something we're not, that's something that we're also going to explore on. Yeah. Of course,
and I love the fact that you brought that up, because that actually ties up to the question of the ingredients of the character that make up what integrity is, and that's what, you know, the topic of our discussion today. You know, when you talk about integrity, as we define it, integrity is your ability to meet the demands of reality. Your ability to meet the demands of reality, and being able to meet your demands of reality, you're going to be tested, you know, time and again.
That's so interesting. So you're defining integrity as the ability to meet the expectation of reality.
Demands. Yeah, the demands.
The demand.
Yeah, the demands of reality.
And I want the audience to also know that obviously we could have discussions like this anywhere with anyone. One of the reasons that we're doing this with Hugo is because sorry, hold on, yeah. One of the reasons that we're doing this with Hugo is because he is a philosopher, and so it really helps to bring clarity, you know, within the context of his background, and that's why you know, it's important that we remember that a lot of what he's talking about has a reference point, has a scholastic reference point. Yes, yeah. So.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
And philosophical reference points. So let's go back to the definition of integrity. Yes.
Yes. So it's yeah. So it's very interesting. I define integrity as ability to meet the demands of reality. So that ability to meet the demands of reality, by that I mean that from time and again, you know, reality is going to test you. If you set up a vision for yourself, or a goal for yourself, that this is who I want to become, or this is what reality I want to create, this is something I want to create, and you set out on that mission, challenges are going to be thrown at you. Problems are going to be thrown at you. You're going to have to struggle with trying to meet up with that. And the reason is because whenever you create a vision for yourself, whenever you create an ideal for yourself, that this is what I want to become, this is who I want to become, whenever you create a goal for yourself, that goal or that ideal that you set off for yourself becomes a judge for you. Because automatically when you set a goal, you fall short of that goal, because for you to now achieve that goal, for you to become that person, automatically there's a gap that you have to fill. Because once you set the goal, you said, okay, I'm making $100,000 this year. And I said, I want to make $1 million next year, or I want to make $2 million, or I want to become a doctor. Once you set a goal for yourself, automatically there's a gap that's been created. And that cap that has been created, you have to now meet it up. The goal that you set has become an ideal that is going to judge you, and your conscience, through the means of your conscience, is going to judge you to know if you meet up with that ideal. So the demands of that reality is going to throw at you becomes the things that you have to go. This is the goal, and this is you. The things that you have to struggle with in order to meet up with that goal, those are the demands that reality is going to throw at you. Now, integrity is your ability to build a character that will allow you to go through those demands, meet all of those demands, meet all of those tests, more like tests that are going to be set for you, and be able to arrive at the ideal that you have set out for yourself. And that requires, for you to do that, there are ingredients of character that you need to imbue within yourself in order to be able to reach up with that. And I'm saying this in respect to what you talked about, earlier, about leaders, that people who find themselves in leadership positions, it doesn't mean that they are perfect. It doesn't mean that they have it all. It simply means that these are the people who try as much as possible to meet the demands of reality by building a character that will allow them to weather the storm as they go through the process. That is essentially what it means. The definition of reality that I defined last week, as I was trying to, as we looked at the foundational meaning, the etymological meaning of integrity, you come to understand that integrity comes from the Latin word integer, which means whole, complete, something that is whole and complete. And when we talk about something that is whole and complete, and then you're talking about that in relationship with human behavior, with human action, with human character, then a lot of people become skeptical, because then you're talking about, does it mean that you have to be perfect, in the sense? And that gets us back to the question of, does a leader have to be perfect in order to lead, in order to lead themselves? No, it doesn't mean that you have to be perfect. It means that whatever you are good at, whatever it is that you're good at, your strengths, your areas of strength, you have to be able to be all round in those areas. You have to be able to meet the demands of reality in those areas. And that's the way you're talking about bringing up having a certain set of character that will allow you to face the demands that reality is going to throw at you, the challenges that reality is going to throw at you. And reality will throw those challenges at you often and so on, almost every time. So I was discussing some of the characteristics, some of the ingredients, and last week we talked about ability to connect authentically, establish trust with people. And we talked about our ability to be oriented towards the truth. If you're always looking after the truth and not being right, then you are approaching life like a scientist. Scientists look at life objectively. They're always going for the truth. There's a difference between going for the truth and looking to be right. If you're looking to be right, that's a different thing. If you're going for the truth, that's a different thing. It shapes your mindset, the way you approach things. That empowers you to try to go for to try to look at things as they are. That empowers you. That essentially gives you the ability to think clearly, because in my book, An Exercise in Clear Thinking, I talked about that one of the most important factors that will help you in processing information will be to be able to look at reality as it is. And it's a very difficult thing to do because our brain has been designed in such a way that we are inclined towards biases. There are a lot of cognitive biases that we are inclined towards. And that's because of lack of resources and limited cognitive resources, mental resources, we cannot process information at the rate that we need to process them. So our brains time and again have to take shortcuts in thinking. And it also has to try to warp reality in order to suit what we want, our ego most times. And because of these, we can err in our thinking process, and that's what we call bias. So bias is a natural thing that is built into our system, our neural decision-making architecture. It's something that is naturally built into it. So you have to take on this approach of promising yourself, of coming to understand that, okay, I have to look at life from the perspective of seeking the truth and truth for its own sake, not for any ulterior motive, but seeking truth for its own sake.
Can I ask a question right here before because there's a lot of content, so I want to break that down a little bit more for the audience. When you talk about truth, right? The observation, first of all, why is there bias? Like, why is bias important? Like, there's a reason. I really believe, because I study science as well and biology, right? So, and genetics. I believe that we come to know that everything happens for a reason in nature. They don't really try to waste energy to produce something that's not important. I understand that we also, as a survival being, we always try to get a shortcut to basically organize our knowledge so that it will help us to equip us to deal with any situation that's needed. Now, maybe that's why bias is formed, I don't know, but I need to ask you why bias is important, because that also bias creates misjudgment, and really racism, for example, is part of the bias, right? So I wanted to just talk about that a little bit. Now, in terms of the truths, I just had a conversation with somebody, because this is a Q&A, so I'm going to just kind of like throw at you. Yesterday, I had somebody who basically was not happy because she felt judged. She felt like a lack of validation. So I tried to explain to her that most people are not really self-aware, and that if she is seeking external validation based on people, that are not self-aware themselves, then it can really disappoint. So I asked her that, if you're doing the right thing, and then you should have the peace to hold your ground without really feeling being judged, and so on and so forth, without really emotionally reacting to the situation. And then I kind of mentioned how the importance of observation. It is really difficult sometimes. I think that most of us are still learning how to observe ourselves. So maybe that's something that you want to kind of touch on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So I'm going to start off with bias, because we talked about some of the positive aspects of bias. Like I said earlier, bias is a natural phenomenon. It's something that comes from the way that naturally our brain processes information, and they are a product of human nature. And the reason for that is because they don't simply exist in a vacuum. They exist or in our minds. They actually come from a natural succession of how our brain processes information. And the reason for that is because of limited resources. So to process information, your mind has two parts. There is the conscious mind, and then there is the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind has a very high processing capability. The conscious mind has a very small processing capability. And when you're making judgments, when you're making decisions, most times you're interpreting things using your conscious mind, and your conscious mind has a limited resource when it comes to processing information. And in order for you to get along, to make things, it has to take shortcuts, get the point, and mental shortcuts in order to make some of those decisions. A good example is if you look at, I want to use something that is a bit more practical now. So a good example is if you walk into a room, and you are looking for your red shirts. Get the point. You're looking for your red shirts. once you get into that room, your mind automatically, because of that's what you're looking at, it narrows your focus and it heightens your attention to notice anything that is red. And automatically, every other thing that is not red gets relayed under the background. It's moved to the background. You get the point? So, and that allows you, it's a form of a bias, because your mind needs to do that in order to narrow down its focus for you to be able to find the red shirts faster. If it notices everything, then you're going to find it difficult locating the red shirts. So the part of the brain that actually does that, scientists have come to know, is what we call is the reticular activating system. It's a group of parts of the brain that come together, the reticular activating system, to help you to put in focus the things that you notice and help you to focus, to narrow your focus towards a particular thing. There are other functions that the reticular activating system actually also does. But one of this is helping you to narrow down your focus. That's what happens when you want to buy a red sports car, and all of a sudden, if you're on the streets, or you want to buy a red shoe, if you're on the streets and you're suddenly noticing everyone that is wearing a red shoe.
And that's why you're saying that in the past, you were saying that what you pay attention to is what you attract.
Exactly, because your mind narrows the focus to that, and you fail to see every other thing. Now, the same thing happens. Now, let me now tell you where it becomes a bias, an unhelpful bias. Now, this first instance that we talked about, where you're focusing your attention to a specific thing that you're talking about, that's a helpful bias, because it's helping you to locate something that you're looking for. It's helping you to achieve a goal. But it becomes an unhelpful bias, an unconscious cognitive bias, when we now talk about confirmation bias. And what is confirmation bias? Confirmation bias is the tendency for you to selectively search for or interpret information in a way that confirms one's perception or hypothesis. You get the point? So when you now are looking for when you come into an environment, and because you have a preconceived notion that Black people are violent or white people are racist, because you already have that preconceived notion, when you're interacting with somebody on that level, because of your bias, your understanding of how they are supposed to behave, you begin to look out for that in them. You're looking out for that specific quality in them. In the same way, you're looking out for the specific quality of red, or you're looking out for the specific quality of...
So it changes the way you interpret somebody's behavior. Exactly. And that led to that actually lead to further reinforcement of bias, or whatever you think it exists, it exists.
Exactly, right? Exactly. So that is actually how it happens. So you want to understand that in the session where we talked about the physics of judgment, where I explained in detail the physics behind judgment, decision making, and all of this. So if you understand that bias is a natural part of human being, the natural part of human cognitive process, then you want to make sure to know when to use your bias, when to allow your bias to come into play, and when not to allow it to come into play. And that is that's where we now talk about intellectual literacy, ability to control how the cognitive skills to learn how to make judgments in the right way. So there are two kinds of bias. There's a conscious bias and there's an unconscious bias. Now, the conscious bias is the one that it's an explicit bias. You are the one, you decide, you have it under control. It's an explicit bias. A good example would be when you decide to have a belief that you're going to be successful at something, even though you know you suck at that. A good example, let's say you're preparing for a football match, and you know you suck at playing football, but you tell yourself, I am very good at football. Now, you know you're not good. Deep down within you, you know you're not good at football, but you're telling yourself that you're developing that bias so that it can motivate you to try to train hard get yourself involved, motivate you to become better at that. So by exercising that conscious bias, it's a bias, but you have it under control. So it's a conscious bias, it's an explicit bias. By exercising that, you can actually use that to narrow your focus towards a specific thing. Like when you're looking for the red shirt in your room, you have it under control. So you use it to narrow your focus to be able to achieve that. But when it becomes unconscious, that's where it's dangerous, because you no longer have it under control. So it can now begin to run your cognitive process. You begin to make judgment, bad decisions based on a bias that you don't even know that you are exhibiting. So that's, the difference there. So you want to understand the role that bias plays, how it comes into human judgments, and how it actually affects the way that we do things. So I think the most important thing there is, it still goes back to what we talked about, what we're talking about, integrity and being able to lead yourself, bringing intentionality into your process. So that intentionality comes from having intentionality over your mind, over your thinking process, some kind of metacognition that allows you to now know, to be able to process your thinking, to know when the bias you have, when you're exhibiting bias and when you're not exhibiting a bias, when you have your bias under control and when you don't actually have it under control. So I'm curious of what you think about that. How much control do you think people actually exercise when it comes to managing their bias? I think we should do a session on managing bias. To have explore more on this very topic of bias. What do you think?
I think that's a really good idea. I'm a very solution-oriented person. I think it's very important for us to always, addressing the most urgent issues around us. We obviously, one of the issues we're still dealing with today is racism. And that is something that we, and it's something that we need to address. Yes. So I think that would be a great.
Yes, because if people become more intentional about their cognitive processes, they become more intentional about how they process information, then you begin to have control over your bias. And even the question of racism becomes, it becomes it becomes less of an issue because we have become more mature in the process of making judgments and understanding how to bring that into focus in what we are doing. And it's very important in relation to what we are talking about, having integrity and being able to meet the demands of reality. And
okay, so I think that we can probably set up our next meeting to address that. But on the topics of self-leadership, I want to know if we are going to explore that a little bit more, because that is really important. Self-leadership, it really affects every part of our life. And how do you build the ingredients in your life so that your integrity can meet the demand of your life? Perhaps in the last 15 minutes or so of our meeting here, we can address that so that basically the audience can go home with the know-how.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much for that question. In the last session, we talked about some of the ingredients that make up the character that build integrity. So for you to build up your integrity, to be able to meet the demands of reality and to be able to be successful at what you do, essentially what does that, what builds off integrity, is character. I'm going to talk about character. I think I believe the way I define character, I think character is the culture of the mind. It's what I call the culture of the mind. In the same way you have a culture for people. When we are in think in high school, when we're in primary school, we define culture. They used to define culture for us as a people's way of life, the way people do things. Yeah. So, but I've come to understand that culture, has a much deeper meaning. But if you're defining it as the culture of the mind, then we're talking about it's how the mind actually processes information, how the mind actually, the framework that determines how the mind interprets reality. It's more like a lens through which you view reality. And I think that's the core message of my book, An Exercise in Clear Thinking, because I talk about using the right framework to interpret reality every time that you encounter a problem. And for different problems, there are different frameworks for looking at reality. There are different lenses to look at reality. If you're looking at a problem that has a biological basis, you want to look at it from a scientific lens. You don't want to look at it from a religious lens. You don't want to look at it from a political lens, because it's a problem that has to do with human health. And when you're talking about human health, you're talking about biology, you're talking about science. If you're looking at a problem that has to do with climate change, you want to look at it from the lens of science. That is what will allow you to arrive at the truth. Remember, we talked about that the third point is ability to get yourself to get ability to get yourself oriented towards the truth. So being able to orient yourself towards the truth, it's being able to think clearly. And for you to do that, you have to use the right framework to look at things. And that is what I think culture is, the culture of the mind is. That is what character is. Now, character is your ability to develop the culture of the mind for different areas of your life. Having a strong culture of the mind that actually empowers you to behave in a way that approaches reality, from an empowerment perspective, that approaches reality as it is and being able to navigate life, without having to struggle. You get the point.
This is so interesting, because I've never even thought about that before. And that is why it's so important to have somebody who is really expert in thought process, how to think, to lead this session like Ugo, because I've never thought about, for example, the issues in the USA for abortion. It became a religious issue. However, there are also about human rights. There's also a mixture of women feel that my body is my body. Nobody has the right to tell me what to do with my body. Now, that's a very complex issue. But, obviously, there are other topics that people are struggling with. And
exactly. Very important.
And now that this is the first time I've ever thought about, oh yeah, well, that makes sense. Like, now that's why people are arguing, because they're using a different frame to look at this, and they're arguing. It's like an apple and an orange. So So I guess two things that we need to know is, for everybody, for every single audience here, how do they choose which lens to use? The second thing is, collectively as a group, how do they come together and choose which lens to use when they are making discussions? Because obviously, people who is like the abortion issue, right? People who is really passionate about even on the topic of human right. There's a human right for the mother, and there's a human right for the unborn fetus, right? So how do you? I think that would really solve a lot of like potential issues, and this is part of the process of conflict resolutions.
And I love that, and I love that you brought up this because this is a very super important thing that's I think that actually causes the lot of division and inability to have conversations with each other. And it's very important that we understand how this actually works. So I'm going to point out that for a lot of issues that we deal, especially social issues in our society, that there are the causes of a lot of division in our society. It's important to understand that sometimes there isn't one framework to look at something. You get the point? Most times there isn't one framework to look at it. But when you're looking at a reality, you want to understand what are the frameworks that are involved. First of all, you want to study the reality that that is on the question. So if you're talking about the question of human rights, let's say we'll talk about abortion. So what are the factors involved? What are the elements involved? So you think of the problem as a system, and every system has elements that make it up. And there are interactions or connections between those elements that make it up. And then there is the output, function, or purpose of that whole system that comes together to create the whole system. So if you think of the problem as a system that's made up of elements, connection between those elements, and then the output, the function or the purpose or the results that comes from all of those things, then you want to start addressing also, okay, what are the elements involved? You would understand, okay, the elements involved here are, we're talking about the rights of the mom. We're equally talking about the rights of a child. We are all equally talking about the psychological impact. You know, we are also talking about the economic factors that are involved with giving birth to a child and rearing the child. We're also
talking about the religious issues, and also, let's just say that a mother was sexually assaulted. What does it mean to add that to this person's life? And really, when you think about that, when there's under circumstances like that, when a child is born, what's the treatment to this child, you know, from the bigger community around this child? That's, you know, if people just solely focus on, say, religious, like, you know, because it's a life, and therefore, and of course, it also depends on how you define what a life is, right? And so that's really, because the people who is making this judgment and definitions and passing on the opinions, they are not the one who has to grow up with a child, to raise the child. They are not the one who's going to be the child. They're not the one who's going to be the mother. They're not going to be the one who's the husband or the family or the community that's dealing with these issues. So that, you know, it is important to look at.
It's a complex matter, because there are a lot of elements involved, like I talked about. The problem is a system of factors, a system of elements coming together, and they are interacting with each other, and they are leading to a particular function or output or something that is a result. So oftentimes when we make bad decisions, when we have issues in a problem, is that when we are looking at it sometimes from the wrong lens, or when we are looking at it solely from a particular lens, and then we are ignoring other lenses. You get the point? So we are giving more importance or more credit to a particular lens, and then we are leaving the other. So if you're looking at the religious lens, and then your focus is solely on that, and then because of that, you're neglecting the lens of the psychological issue, the psychological the psychological impact on the mom, the psychological impact on the child, the psychological impact on the immediate environment, the economic impact on the on the mom, and also the people who are around you. Then it becomes a question of, then it becomes problematic, because you're actually looking at only one lens. You're focusing on one lens and leaving all the others. But what I suggest, what I usually tell people is that, at the same time,
the legal aspect of it, because this, when it becomes a law, people who disobey the law, they are violating law, and then there can be legal consequences. It's like it's adding oil to the fire. You know, so how do we, So
what I suggest, what I usually tell people is this: when you have a problem before you, you want to first of all try to understand what the problem is, understand the physics of the problem, understand the nature of the problem, by understanding the factors that are involved. And then you have to analyze these problems to know which of them has greater impact than the others. You get the point? Which has a greater impact on the people that are directly involved, on the people around them, and on the society in general. So when you understand those who are greatly involved, and the factors that are involved, and the degrees at which they are involved, then you begin to understand, okay, what are the lenses, which lenses should we give priority to in viewing the problem? What lens should we give priority to? Which one should come on the second level? Which other lens should we come? So you're now beginning to look at it from a more scientific approach. And a good way to look at the indicators of these things is usually from a very simple question of who feels the most pain, who suffers the most pain in a problem, in an issue. So if you're talking about, let's say, the problem, or who's going to suffer more in this problem at the end, if we take the decision that we want to take. So when we are looking at it from the perspective of who suffers the most pain, so we want to start from alleviating the person's pain, alleviating the entity's pain, and then we'll start to narrow down and go down on the scale as it progresses. So I think that's a good framework of looking at the problem. So if you bring it down to the problem of even abortion, you will find out that by the time you use this method in analyzing it, you might come up with a different decision for a child, or for a young woman that wants to commit abortion in California, than a young woman, a different decision from a young woman that wants to have an abortion in California, or a young woman that is pregnant in California, from a young woman that is pregnant in Nigeria. A young woman that is pregnant in UK from a young woman that is pregnant in Pakistan. So you get the point. So you find out that the decisions, there is no one standard, there is no one size fits all. Because when you start looking at issues from this, it allows you to use a more dynamic lens to approach things. And that is where the problem of having a one general rule, to view things, it can be very problematic, because people's experiences are not the same. People's experiences are diverse, they are different, and they are unique based on culture, they are unique based on circumstances, they are unique based on unique experiences. So you want to start analyzing the problem from that way, and then you begin to understand there are people who should have abortion and people who shouldn't have abortion, depending on the environment that they find themselves, the unique circumstances they find themselves, all of that. So
it's almost like, from what I can tell, what you said actually really give me abortion issues almost should never really be a legal issues, because it really should be based on case by case, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there's probably some people don't want to hear that, but it is a very private, a very intimate subject for people who's involved in the law. There's no law in the world will be able to address these intimate details about this particular issues. And so we are really, that's another thing that I noticed is like so many arguments about this, right?
Human laws are very limited because of the limitedness of human understanding of the peculiarities and the amalgamation of all the issues that are involved in people. People are very divergent, life is very dynamic and things are very different. You get the point? So
and that's so like that's suddenly I was like, wow. So when there's a controversial issue or a legal issue, that is really a reminder of us that maybe it shouldn't be a legal issue. Maybe it's not something to be addressed by using a legal parameter.
Of course.
Right? So yeah, thank you for this. I just want to say thank you. Yeah.
The reason there is even a legal issue in the first place is because the law is limited. The law is imperfect. That's why there is a legal issue. That's where people are struggling with the issues. That's how we have to bring in many lawyers to try to interpret it. And when you bring in so many different lawyers, they interpret it from different realities, from different perspectives. That goes to show you that the law in and of itself is not comprehensive, and it can never be fully comprehensive. It's not, because our understanding of our laws are simply moral rules. And as I define moral rules are rules are a deduction from natural laws. Human beings trying to make a deduction from natural laws based on their current understanding of the laws of nature. That's what simple moral rules are. And they are quite different from ethical rules. Ethical rules are direct deductions of natural law. And you can't go above that. You can't go beyond those ones, because those are laws of nature. You get the point. So you can't doubt those ones. That's why they are ethical rules. But when you're talking about moral rules, that's why a moral rule in Canada is different from a moral rule in the United States. A moral rule,
I can give a really good example for that. Like, well, somehow, the Nazis, for example, during the Nazi era,
exactly,
it's illegal to be certain type of people, right?
It was right to kill the Jews. It wasn't wrong.
But it's illegal. Something is legal does not mean that it's ethical or moral. Exactly.
It doesn't mean that it's ethical. It doesn't mean that it's in tandem with the laws of nature. So you get the point. And that is why moral rules evolve. That is why countries amend their constitution, because constitutions are not sacred. They are dependent on the evolving nature of human beings and their evolving understanding of how the world works. So you get the point. So they are not sacred. They keep being updated. So I usually tell people, before you study your country's constitution, your nation's constitution, try to understand the laws of nature first. Try to understand how the world works. If you're a lawyer, before you study law, before you get into the arguments of the law, try to understand how the world works. Because if you disobey ethical rules, if you disobey the laws of nature, nature will punish you, whether it's in tandem with your country, whether it's legal or not. You will still suffer the consequences.
So is natural law, is it more on the ethical side, or I don't think it's on the moral side, because I just want to throw in a story. In many cultures in the old days, women are subjugated under men. When women do something as simple as, let's just say that the husband passed away and they want to remarry, it's actually considered as immoral to do that in the society. So I will ask, like, what is the when you say natural law? Naturally, from my point of view, when a husband passes on, a woman should have the right to be happy if they meet someone else. And to me, that's ethical almost. It's like, how can you stop a woman from seeking her happiness, right? Now, but then in a lot of contexts, not only that is legal, it's also considered immoral in a society. But is that necessarily ethical or falling with the natural law? And I think it's also, again, it's probably a personal decision, because I've seen women who has to single-handedly raise many children on her own after the husband passed on, but she didn't remarry or something like that because she cherished that memory. She didn't want to tarnish that memory. Versus maybe say some relationship is not as good, and if the husband passed on, she could remarry and maybe have a better life. So I just wanted to ask you that question. When you say natural, is that ethical? I think that's what you meant.
Okay. Let me clarify that by defining the terms, first of all. So the word moral comes from the Latin mores, which means norms. customs, rules. And when we talk about norms, customs, and rules, those are human created. They are inventions of human beings by their understanding of how the world works, by the way they have been interacting with nature around them. So from their culture, from their traditions. Culture and traditions are the consequences of people's interaction with their environment. So they create a culture, they create a tradition out of that culture. You know, they create norms and rules. So that's what morals mean. So when we talk about moral rules, we are talking about human invented rules to guide them. It doesn't necessarily mean that all human invented rules are wrong. No, some of them are ethical. Now, let me define the word ethical. Ethics actually means principles. From the word ethica, it means principles, and it means principles of nature, principles of life. So ethics, when we talk about the ethics of life, we're talking about the core principles, fundamental principles of nature. So to some extent, we can say it's synonymous to the laws of nature from the perspective of how it guides human behavior. So what is an ethical principle? A good example of an ethical principle would be that as much as possible. Okay, a good example, let's look at the question of even the question that you talked about, which is about a woman, you know, having to marry after her husband is dead. In some cultures, it is forbidden, whilst in others, it is permitted. Whilst other cultures are, you know, are unconcerned, it's not a question even at all. So the question now becomes, should it be a moral rule or should it be an ethical rule? Now, if you look at cultures that have that as a moral rule, that a woman should not remarry after the husband is dead. So the question now becomes, should it actually be a moral rule? And you look at some of those societies that have evolved to become more lenient on those issues. So the question we should be asking is not exactly whether a woman should remarry or not. That's the wrong question. The reason we are struggling to fit it into a template, into a rule or a custom, or even the reason that we're even considering it as a question in the first place is because we are looking at it from the wrong lens. That's what I told you about. Looking at things from the right lens. The question that we should be asking is, a woman that her husband has just died, or a woman that her husband is dead, after that, will she be happy? Will she be able to take care of her children, lead a happy life, and become meaningful to the general human community by marrying or by staying single? That should be the question. That should be the right framework through which we should be analyzing that issue, looking at that issue. So if she would be happy by marrying, by remarrying, by having another man be in their life or support them, then remarrying becomes a beneficial thing in nature, and even for the culture, and even for every person, all parties interested in that question. Remarrying becomes now an ethical thing to do. But if she's not going to be happy doing that, if she prefers to be on her own, and she cherishes the memory she had with her late husband, and she prefers to reserve that memory, she doesn't want another person to mingle with that memory, and she feels that she's going to be okay, and she's going to contribute meaningfully to the society, and also be useful to herself by not remarrying, by towing that path, then by all means, she shouldn't remarry. Because from that end, she will be more beneficial to herself. She will be more useful to herself and more beneficial to her society by taking that action. So it all comes down to understanding the things that we should be considering and from what lens we should be considering them with. That's why I talked about that. For you to actually look at reality, for you to actually act in the right way, you should know how to analyze reality. And by knowing how to analyze reality, we are talking about knowing the framework to look at things, understanding the right framework to analyze issues. And sometimes you have to analyze an issue from multiple frameworks. But from those multiple frameworks, there are degrees of importance. There are degrees of lenses or degrees of frameworks through which you should analyze them. There are degrees that should give more priority, and there are other lenses that we should give less priority based on the problem, the peculiarity of the problem that we have at hand. So I think we have
that's
done.
amazing. Yes, wow, that's quite, actually, we touch upon many different very important topics. And I think that we need more time to explore because it has been 1 hour. I think it's over 1 hour actually. And yes. Let us work on the next topic. And so today we are going to wrap up, and we just talk about so many things. Initially, we started with the integrity and then self-leadership. And then on we talk about truths. And then we also talk about how do we choose the lenses that we need to interpret a particular issue, a reality, and then the process of how to do so. So we will be exploring more on these topics. And later on, actually, we did also talk about, we're going to talk about bias, the importance and the misdirecting of biases, and how do we leverage it to our benefit. So this is what we're going to talk about. And on that topic, we mentioned that we will probably also go over and dissect the issue of racism. So this is, well, thank you so much. And Ugo, would you like to, before we end the session? Thank you.
Yeah, it's been we touched upon a broad section of our topics, and that's really why I love this format and that we're using, where we have to, because it allows us to diversify and then look at the issues from different perspectives and then touch upon, and then look at them as it actually pertains to real life issues that we're facing, as it actually affects us, and then how it's human problems, real life human problems, and how they affect us every day. So I'm really glad that we do this, that we did this, and then hopefully we'll continue on this path.
Yes, thank you so much again. Thanks for being here with us, the audience, and we look forward to, you are welcome to go to our website, nextf.org, is nexeve.org. And you're welcome to register there. And then even though in some of the questions and discussions we talked about, also please do follow us on Facebook as well as LinkedIn. And then you can actually find Coach Ugo's, Coach Ugo is a learning coach versus a life coach. And so you can basically learn anything that you want to learn in life with Coach Ugo. And you can find him on LinkedIn. So thank you for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. And you can, if you love to be part of these, to be notified and be part of these sessions, these are broadcasts that we do. We have this reinvention workshop every Sunday at 8 p.m. GST. I think at 5 p.m. GST. Okay, yeah, no.
We're changing it to an hour earlier, starting next week. So it will be 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, Pacific Daylight Time, and then 10
p.m. 8 p.m. That's 8 p.m. GST, and then 8 a.m. your time, right?
Today we started at 9 a.m. my time, but that was I believe for you, it was 8 p.m. So, GST is Gulf Standard Time. And so starting next week will be 7 p.m. Gulf Standard Time. 8 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time, and then yeah, so on. So Pacific Standard Time is 2 hours before Central Standard Time, and 3 hours before Eastern Standard Time. Thank you.
No, the times are really very confusing in a world where you have to collaborate online and do Zoom. In the Zoom world, it can be really a challenge where you have to deal with all the time and time zones and all of that. But it's okay. So if you would like to join us, please do well to sign up on our website, and you see you sign up on the emails, our sessions, and you input your email. I think we have an option for you to sign up for the sessions, yeah, and also for our newsletters, so that you'll be notified whenever we're going to have the sessions and whenever we drop any of our informative contents that you can also learn from, that we drop every week. So it's been a great pleasure discussing this session with you, Dr. Eileen, and I look forward to having more sessions with you, and even having a better one next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, Ugo. It's another enlightening session.
Yeah.
Okay, so
right, guys.
bye.